is The Sports Life.
Howard rolling to his left, looking to throw. Howard pants, fires deep down the right side. Ibuka got into the goal line for a touchdown. Emeka Ibuka.
And all of a sudden, all kinds of problems, and here's another slam dunk by Carr. Wow.
Hand off to Taylor. Waits, has a seam into the secondary. 20, 10, 5, reaching forward. Touchdown. Minnesota Golden Gophers, Darius Taylor.
Some fun sounds from Big Ten football and basketball, as this week marked the official beginning of the college basketball season. We'll team in here along with Dalton Scheller, and welcome to our show. And we have a fun one lined up for you, I think, with some intrigue as well. Bill Bender from the Sporting News is going to join us. And we're going to talk about the Big Ten football season. Is it what we thought it might be? And we're going to talk about 12 teams making the playoffs and how many of those might be from the Big Ten.
It's really exciting as the Big Ten getting a lot of respect in the first release of those college football playoff rankings. We're also going to be joined by Albert Samaha and Emily Giambalvo of the Washington Post as they did a deep dive into the world of NIL economics in college athletics and also address some of the inequities that exist within those economics. It'll be certainly a fascinating conversation I think we all come away learning a little bit more from.
Yeah, maybe. Here's hoping. Anyway, so how about the sounds of the week?
Sounds of the week. Let's go ahead and start as the number one team in the country. The Oregon Ducks walked into the Big House and walked out with a 38-17 win over the Michigan Wolverines. This is the first time, obviously, Oregon just joining the Big Ten, that they go for a conference game to Ann Arbor for this game. And they got to experience the Big House. And what Oregon head coach Dan Lanning said afterwards was pretty impressive as well.
Loud on third down. This is a special place, right? There's obviously a lot of history here. But again, like what we said all week, the Warriors control the atmosphere, right? Not the spectators. And I thought our guys did a great job of handling that.
And they did. There's no question about it. And the other thing about his Warriors, they're really pretty good.
They most certainly are, and they walk out with that 38-17 win. That's a line I think I'm going to keep in the pocket. The Warriors control the atmosphere. Well, how about, along the same vein, what number 4 Ohio State did last week with a win at number 3 Penn State? 20-13, the Buckeyes get the win. They control the atmosphere, and Ohio State head coach Ryan Day spoke afterwards to the media in what was a very transparent moment of honesty.
We were at a crossroads. This was a big game for us. We didn't really want to publicly say that, but we said that behind closed doors. It's a big game for us for a lot of reasons. And to get a top 5 win like this on a road in a tough environment, we had to find a way to get a stop and to get that extra first down or score. And that's what it's going to come down to. Guys came back on this team for a reason. It's to go win the rivalry game, win the Big Ten championship, and win a national championship. And so along the way, I think there was this conversation about the expectations and all those types of things. And I said to the team, there's no great accomplishments that happen without going through adversity. It's just the truth. You don't just walk into a season and think you're going to go reach your goals. That's just not the way life works.
Ryan Day, the head coach at Ohio State. Well, you talk about adversity, Dalton. I mean, they've lost one game by 1 point against the number 1 team in the country on the road. But here's the odd part of all this. For them to get in that title game with Oregon, they got to beat Indiana. Who would have ever thought we'd say something like that?
Who's standing in the way? The Hoosiers.
The Hoosiers.
That is something else. Let's go ahead and pivot real quick to Big Ten basketball. As you mentioned, we got the season underway. Looking forward to it. And there was a pretty fun moment on the Big Ten network between BTN's Mike Hall and one of the star Rutgers basketball players, one of the star Big Ten players, you could say, Dylan Harper. The freshman comes in. Of course, he's a brother of Ron Harper Jr. And he reminisced a little bit about going to the rack to see his brother play at Rutgers, except there was one moment I think he kind of wishes he could go back in time for. Let's have a listen to the chat.
I went to every home game basically except for the Purdue game when he hit the game winner. That's the only game I missed.
What are you talking about? Why'd you miss that one?
I had a scrimmage like right before. I'm like, Mom, we gotta go to the Purdue game. She's like, no, like we could watch it on TV. Like it's all good. Go to the next one. And then he did that.
You should have told her, but he's gonna hit the game winner, man.
I wish I would have knew before.
Well, he should have known. What the heck?
Got to be better than that, Dylan.
Yeah,
come
on.
Well, speaking of those Purdue Boilermakers, as they get into the season, there's so many questions about how do you replace somebody like Zach Edey, 7'4", two-time National Player of the Year. Well, Purdue still has a couple of 7-footers, including another 7-foot four-post player in Daniel Jacobson, because of course they do. But Purdue head coach Matt Painter spoke recently after a press conference a little bit about developing those Boilermaker big men, and here's what he had to say.
More than anything, I always try to be honest with guys, but try to make them feel good about themselves. But you got to feel good about yourself. You got to be productive, and it's hard to you feel like you're being, you're over scrutinizing them sometimes when they're first starting, because you just want them to learn. You just want them to know. But you got to have a balance in your delivery as a coach, so they feel good about themselves. And a lot of times guys just yell and scream, and maybe that's good for a couple of them, but a lot of them just, they need to know what's going on. And it's no different than like raising your own kids, and when they're little and you tell them what to do and you're like, yep, I got it, Daddy. I got that. And then you're just like, okay, what did I say? And they'll be like, all right, say it again, Daddy. Like, it's the same way, like they're fatigued, they're in a huddle, and you're like, hey man, this is 20-second, this is going quick here on a timeout. And like, this is what we're running, this is what we're doing. You good? Yeah, I'm good. What am I doing? And so you get some of that, right? You get that they all need to play through their mistakes. And I don't have the ability to let them all play through their mistakes, right? When you just have 200 minutes. So you just got to keep working. And the tape doesn't lie, the film doesn't lie. And you got to be honest about things, but you got some game experience where you can watch it and see what they're doing. We had Creighton, who played in a drop, and then these guys, corralled things and hedged things and trapped things. So it was great, but because now they had to read it.
Matt Painter, Purdue's head basketball coach. Dalton, Matt Painter is the only one to send me to flashbacks of my kids.
So true.
So quit doing that. Anyway, he always makes some sense, though, when he goes through those analogies. On our show, we're going to talk about Big Ten football. Did it really turn out the way we thought it might? And what's it look like heading to the 12-team playoff for the national championship? Well, Bill Bender of the Sporting News is going to help us sort it out in just a moment.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Dad. Did you get a new haircut or something? A new shirt? You're looking good.
What happened?
A little fender bender?
How little?
A few days in the shop little. But thanks to Mom and our agent, we've already submitted a claim and can track the status right from the app. Auto Owners pays what they owe without any hassle.
Sounds like simple human sense.
I'm fine, by the way.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna ask.
Ask your independent agent if Auto Owners makes sense for you.
Every kid deserves a chance to feel safe, to have their own bed, to be loved and cared for. That's why I love my foster parents. They make me feel like part of the family.
Raise hope and foster dreams for one of 13,000 Michigan children in foster care. Visit michigan.gov/hope for a home or call 855-MICH-KIDS. That's 855-MICH-KIDS. Sponsored by the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services and the Michigan Association of Broadcasters.
Do you hear that? That's the sound of uncertainty lurking under your hood. You know the feeling. I know I do. That sudden sinking sensation when you see a check engine light or your car unexpectedly breaks down and you're faced with sky-high repair bills. It's time to shield against unexpected repairs with CarShield. CarShield is America's most trusted auto protection company and has an A rating with the Better Business Bureau. Don't let the fear of a breakdown keep you up at night. Trust the Shield, CarShield, and say goodbye to terrifying repair bills and hello to peace of mind. Your plan also comes with 24/7 roadside assistance, courtesy towing, rental car options, and so much more. Don't wait till it's too late. Call CarShield now before a breakdown. Protect your wallet. Protect your car with CarShield. Get our best protection ever. Call now. You'll thank me later. 800-965-1292. 800-965-1292. That's 800-965-1292.
We'll be back with more in a moment. This is The Sports Life.
Roxanne Watson is on a mission.
Hello, how are you
doing today?
She wants more people to register as organ, eye, and tissue donors.
Are you an organ donor?
Yes, I am.
Yay. My goal is to sign up the most people in the United States.
What drives her? Roxanne's own life was saved through the gift of a heart transplant, made possible by an organ donor.
I decided that day that I was going to devote myself to the cause of organ donation and signing people up and honoring my donor by doing that.
Now she's back to health, and she's a powerful force helping to save lives every day through her work. Imagine what you can make possible by leaving behind the gift of life.
8 people can be helped with the major organs, and up to 50 people can be helped with a little bit of everything. And when you think about it that way, that you could help that many people, it's amazing. It really is.
Learn more and sign up as an organ, eye, and tissue donor. Go to organdonor.gov. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Health Resources and Services Administration.
And welcome back for more of the Sports Life. Will Tiemann here along with Dalton Shetler. Well, Big Ten football is interesting. Some parts have gone as we thought it might, and then there's some other parts that have been a little intriguing. And joining us to sort it out as we head towards the end of the regular season and into bowl season, and most importantly, maybe the college football playoffs with 12 teams, we're bringing on Bill Bender. And Bill is a columnist for the Sporting News, and whenever we need to talk to a smart person, we call Bill. So, Bill, welcome to the show.
Talk about an oversell. No, thank you so much for having me on. It's great. I try to write smart content, but I've been telling people all year, I mean, and you guys probably feel the same way, we're in uncharted territory. I don't know how it's going to go with this 12-team playoff, and it's created a lot of excitement as a result.
Well, the one thing that's kind of interesting, you thought Oregon would be good, Ohio State would be good, and Penn State would be good. And they're good. Indiana, nobody had them on a radar, and they are pretty good. So as you kind of look at this landscape of things, in terms of Indiana, you could project they only have one team left on the schedule that might beat them, and that's Ohio State in Columbus. So win or lose that game, should they be in the 12?
Yes, and here's one. I remember seeing you guys at Big Ten Media Day in Indianapolis. If I would have came up to your booth and said, hey, guys, Indiana's going to be a 14-point favorite against Michigan in November, and they're probably going to cover. Would you have said, what are you talking about? I think he's a Coach of the Year candidate. One of the things he did, we brought all these transfers from James Madison, and those guys – I look back at it and say, okay, those guys were 10-0 last year. They know how to win. They have that belief. They added on Curtis Rourke, who you guys have seen, and I believe is at least a day 2 NFL quarterback that will get a chance to play in the league. And then you throw on top of that a really stingy defense that is in the top 5 statistically. They profile statistically like Michigan last year in a lot of ways. So if they were wearing a Notre Dame helmet or a Penn State helmet, I guess if they were wearing a plain helmet, Ohio State helmet without the Buckeye leaves, they'd be ranked in the top 4.
I'd say that's completely fair to say at this point. And I'm curious, too, as we talk about some of those really good programs, maybe this is a good follow-up to throw at you here now, Bill. When we talk about Oregon, we talk about Ohio State, we talk about Penn State, we could even still talk a little bit about Indiana. Obviously, these are all legitimate contenders and probably will make the college football playoff. Do you believe any of these programs, or how many of them, have the capability to win it all this year?
Yeah, I think, Oregon, certainly. Ohio State, certainly. I mean, those two played a fantastic game there on October 12th, and we'll probably do it again here in a few weeks. Indiana's, to me, capable of making a run, and I guess the one that got questioned the most last night was Penn State. And Penn State's this is probably the wrong station to do this with because I'm a Packers fan. And I feel like Penn State how I feel about the Packers. They take care of business against teams that they should take care of business against. And then when they go play the Lions in a quote-unquote big game, you saw what happened on Sunday. Detroit was the better team. And Green Bay didn't help themselves. And I feel the same way about Penn State. I know that's not a perfect comparison. Does that make sense at all, though, that I just don't know that they can win the big games?
And can I go back to the one thing? I don't know if you answered this. If Indiana comes up short against Ohio State, do they still make it?
I think so. As long as it's not what happened to Michigan State in Columbus a few years ago, where it was, I think it was like 49-0 at halftime. Sorry to bring that game back up, but something like that would maybe turn the committee off because Indiana doesn't have a really strong victory. Though I would argue them beating Nebraska the way they beat them and them beating Michigan State, and if they do the same to Michigan on Saturday, to me, they're just beating teams by healthy margins, and they're doing it by playing sound football and not turning the ball over. I think their defense is underrated. I really do. I mean, they play great assignment football, and I would put them in at 11-1. I was curious last night to see if the committee was going to be so bold as to put Alabama ahead of them, and I'm glad they didn't, because that would have been the one that you're like, okay, then we're talking about the eye test in that vein, where are we really putting a 2-loss team over an unbeaten Big Ten team?
Bill, I wanted to ask you, and for our listeners, a little bit of context. You're based out of Central Ohio, around Columbus. We talked a little bit about Ryan Day. We talked about the Ohio State Buckeyes. Obviously, they lost only by 1 point at Oregon in what was a great game. And then recently, they just survived a game against Nebraska. And going on social media afterwards was not wise on my part because the reaction was so visceral from Buckeye fans. But as we look forward to the postseason, how big is the pressure on Ryan Day and Ohio State? It's such a unique scenario.
Yeah, what a difference 2 weeks makes, really. I would liken it to, it's not the same as Michigan State basketball, where, it's a little bit like that, but they literally expect to win every game here. And I've lived in the bubble for so long that, your views get distorted a little bit. But it was like a funeral after a Nebraska game that they won around here. It was, they can't block anybody. They're not going to be able to win the big game. That Penn State game was huge for them psychologically. And I know part of me is like, well, they beat Penn State every year. And, I think it's just the momentum. That pretty much sealed that they'll at least be in the playoff. And then the pressure in the big games will exist. And one of the things I believe about this year in college football is there's not an untouchable. There are dominant teams, but nobody's untouchable. And even Oregon. So Oregon, Texas, Ohio State, and you can take it down to a few other teams. All of them are good. But when they play each other in the playoff, you can't just show up and win, if that makes sense.
It does. And Bill, I'd like to ask you a little bit about the 4 new members, the West Coast members. Except for Oregon, the other 3 have not been that impressive. Is it travel? Is it the fact they're playing better competition because the Big Ten is better? What's your take on that?
Some of it's just the way you play. Look at the Big 12 last year when they added Cincinnati, Central Florida, Houston, and BYU. Look at their combined record. It was terrible. None of those teams were good. And then you go to this year, and Cincinnati 6-3, BYU is undefeated, and some of those schools had to make the adjustment to playing in a new conference style-wise. Not to mention in the Big Ten, you're traveling 2 time zones. I knew that was going to be a thing, and I know you guys knew it was going to be a thing because I talked to you at a USC-Michigan State basketball game at noon a few years ago and knew it was going to be a thing. I think that's part of it as well. But Oregon's been impressive. USC is kind of the one that I really think their season shifted when Khalil Mullins ran that 65-yard run and Michigan beat them in Ann Arbor when they probably shouldn't have.
Bill, I wanted to ask you about a team that's maybe a little bit under the radar for folks in the Big Ten right now. And this one's an interesting 180 that just hasn't been covered, I feel. But Minnesota, they started the season 2-3. And I remember having conversations with some listeners and fans that said, boy, you got to imagine this might be it for PJ Fleck, huh? I was like, I don't know. You miss a field goal against North Carolina to possibly win it. You had the controversial ending to the Michigan game that ended in a loss. But since Minnesota's rattled off 3 straight wins, they're up to 6 wins, including a recent win over a top 25 Illinois team. PJ Fleck does have the boat rowing a bit in Minneapolis.
Absolutely. And there are opinions on him. I think he's done a fantastic job there. If you look at the long-term history of Minnesota, to have a guy that wins 8 or 9 games there every year, fantastic job. Good guy. Has a shtick that's not for everyone. no question. But when you really get to talk to him, he's a good dude. And those close losses are, this playoff, they expand it to 14 or 16, which I think they will. It's going to be built for teams like that have some warts but are still solid. I mean, the SEC comparison would be South Carolina. If South Carolina beat LSU, I think they would be ranked 15. But they lost those close games. And, Minnesota's really fighting. And as you started to say, who you were introducing, I knew you were talking about Minnesota because they are that team that I'm keeping an eye on. And I'm wondering what they're going to do when they play Penn State in a few weeks. That's going to be a fantastic game.
Well, there's another team that looks like they're ready to be a little bit better, but they somehow don't get there. And I'm talking about Nebraska. They began the season, Bill, with a 5-1 mark. They've now lost 3 in a row. They still haven't got to the 6 to get to a bowl game. What happens to them at the end of the season? Because it sort of was the same thing that happened last year.
Well, they let Ohio State beat them twice, unfortunately, because the team that played in Columbus was very good. Very, disciplined, one up front, nearly won the game. And, then they turn around and lose another one. So I think as a program, psychologically, they just need to get to a bowl game. That's people could say bowl games are meaningless, but to have a chance to have a winning season, Matt Rule can rule with that into his next year. I think he's done a nice job, and they play well in spots, but it's just not completely there yet. I mean, their best victory is probably Colorado. That's a team that is hanging around in the playoff picture. And then you kind of look at that retrospectively, and you're like, man, they limited Colorado and Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter to 10 points. So the turnaround, things take longer in certain places, and they're taking a little bit longer there. But I feel more hopeful about them than I did under the previous regimes.
Well, as a final thought, Bill, when this season concludes, what do you think 2024 will be remembered for the most?
Just that it's something new. And I'm excited to see the games on campus. And I don't know how it's going to work when we get there, but, whoever we crown as the champion, there are a lot of things wrong with college football, but when you sit down and watch the games, they're still pretty good. We've had some really good top 5 showdowns during the year. Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, Georgia. We got to get fans to stop throwing things on the field. That's one that's a little nitpick I have is your fan base throws things on the field and interrupts play. I think your team should be charged with personal foul. That would end that real quick because you don't want to be the fan base that costs your team the game.
And you're thrown out of the stadium.
I mean, there has been some officiating calls. Don't get me wrong. I've never seen a pass interference reversed like we did Georgia, Texas. And if that's a harsh stance and people don't like it, I don't care because we've seen 3 teams do it now, and it doesn't change anything. So maybe that's my youth sports background, coaching background coming out because I always say you can't leave it up to the refs.
Well, that could be applied to any level. Well, as always, Bill, thanks for joining us, and it'll be fun to check back in when this whole thing is done.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Bill Bender with the Sporting News. Always intriguing things that he brings up. Well, speaking of intriguing things, NIL economics. That is our topic next.
So, got one for you, boss.
Oh, yeah?
What's black, white, and dented all over?
I give up.
The company truck. I know, but thanks to our agent, we've already submitted an insurance claim and can track the status right from the app. Auto owners pays what they owe without any hassle.
Lucky for you, that's simple human sense.
Ask your independent agent if auto owners make sense for you.
Here's a real-life story that affects 50% of all of us out there. It's called divorce. If you've gotten divorced and now you're struggling to pay your bills and your credit card debts are completely out of control, you need to call this special debt relief hotline right now. We help people with all kinds of money problems caused by different life challenges, a divorce, a job loss, even heavy medical bills. All these life events can sometimes financially stress you out and cause you to get out of control. We help people get their lives back by showing them ways to consolidate and reduce their debt, in some cases for a fraction of what they owe. If your credit card balances are more than $10,000, call us and learn how to reduce your credit card bills and monthly payments now. Here's our number.
Paid for by Debt.com. Call now, 800-810-1584, 800-810-1584, 800-810-1584. That's 800-810-1584.
That ought to do it. Totally energy efficient.
Oh no, not again. This time, we're getting help.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the battle of energy efficiency improvements. In this corner, Mr. I can save money and do it on my own. And in this corner, Miss Let's Get It Done Right with some help. Fight!
Or you could just go to avoidenergydrama.com. From sealing your home to helpful loan options, you'll find all the tips and tools you need to stop wasting energy and stay comfortable. Avoidenergydrama.com. Brought to you by Michigan Saves.
We'll be back with more in a moment. This is The Sports Life.
Unlike other health concerns, mental illness is not always easy to see. Depression won't show up on an eye chart, and you can't measure it on your bathroom scale. Sorting out a mental health concern is not something to attempt on your own. You won't find a bipolar disorder by looking at a thermometer. Like many other health conditions, help for mental illness takes professional diagnosis and treatment. Anxiety won't just go away under a stick-on bandage. So the sooner you seek treatment, the better. If you or a loved one has a mental health concern, don't go it alone. Find out what to do. For 24-hour free and confidential information and treatment referral, call 1-800-662-HELP. Learn more at samhsa.gov/support. That's samhsa.gov/support.
And welcome back for more of The Sports Life. Will Tiemann here, along with Dalton Shetler. Well, if you like college athletics, the letters NIL, by now I'm guessing you're pretty familiar with them and what it sort of means. Well, Emily Giambalvo and Albert Samaha from the Washington Post took a real close look at the economics of NIL, name, image, and likeness. And both of them are joining us now because they put out a pretty amazing series of articles about what they've discovered as they took a deep look at this. And both of you, welcome to the show. And Emily, since we know you from the Maryland beat, we'll let you go first. So what led you guys to go down this road and look at this NIL economic structure?
Yeah, I mean, I think it started with Albert's idea to do this, and I've been curious about it as someone who is covering college sports for a while. I think a lot of people talk about NIL, but if you'd asked me to give a ballpark number of how much the Maryland women's lacrosse team makes, I would have no idea. Like, the spectrum of what it could be is extremely wide. So I think we just wanted to demystify that a little bit, and then in doing so, see what patterns emerged, what interesting takeaways there might be. And Albert can go into this a bit more, but he kind of led the effort and entirely did the open records request to every power conference school. And what we got back was a very wide degree of transparency in terms of what these schools are willing to share. But we got enough from more than a dozen schools that we felt like we could do some data analysis on what they gave us. And it turned into these 3 stories in this project.
Well, and this is some incredible stuff, and I do want to hear from Albert here in a minute because it sounds like Albert really led a lot of the data research on this project. But Emily, if I ask you before we get to some of the hard facts that Albert's going to present us with, in all the data research, the observations that came away with it from a societal standpoint, whatever takeaways there were from this entire project, what did we learn about college sports and what's happening with the NIL economy?
I mean, I think it kind of confirmed what a lot of people probably assumed was happening. And in a lot of ways, that means the money is going to football and men's basketball and other men's sports, and most all women's sports, except for the programs with these superstar celebrity athletes, are really not getting that much money. The typical college athlete is not making a ton from NIL. And then the people who we see on TV in college football games are making a lot of money. And I think that was interesting. The collective piece of it is interesting because that's seems to be happening in secret in a lot of ways. We don't really know how these entities work. And for the few schools that did label the payments from collectives, it was really interesting just to see a transaction log and see thousands of dollars going out to football players on one day. And you can just like envision what this looks like. It's like all these players on a team are probably getting a check on the same day. That was interesting. And just the concept that most of these payments are really tiny. We hear about the ones that make the headlines, but the fact that most of them are for $10, $50, $100. It's just like a good reminder of how this looks like on a day-to-day basis.
Well, Albert, let's loop you in here because Emily brings up the collectives, and to me, that's one of the most stark things that came out of this series of reports from reading. I believe one of the examples that you had was the institution UCLA. So, Albert, I'm curious if you can kind of take us through some of the numbers of how the collective worked there and just overall some of the overarching numbers that you came across in your data research.
Yeah, so I mean, collectives are these organizations of boosters that basically get together to be able to pay athletes at their school. And most of their money goes to football and men's basketball for no reason other than the fact that these boosters love football and men's basketball. And it's sort of their passion for those sports that is creating this market. And I think what's interesting about how we think about collectives is that when NIL first became a thing and a lot of people across the country were thinking that, college athletes should get paid, it's unfair for these athletes to not be able to make money based off of their personal brands. The model I think a lot of people envisioned was sort of this idea of corporate brands, where if you're a big name and you got a lot of Instagram followers and you can get these brand deals, feel free to make all that money. But I think the booster collective system sort of emerged organically in a way that I think a lot of people didn't expect, which is that a lot of these boosters wanted to draw top name football and men's basketball players to their school. So they decide, let's just gather all our money together. But because we're not allowed to pay them to play, let's assign these token services like doing charity work, signing autographs, showing up in meet and greets. But then let's pay them hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. And it's sort of created this bidding war amongst all these schools. So UCLA, power conference school, trying to compete in this bidding war, they put together their collective in July 2022. It's called Men of Westwood. But it's a bit ironic because it represents the women of Westwood as well. But the money itself was going almost exclusively, as far as we know, to the Men of Westwood, because based on our data, of the $2 million that went from the collective to sports programs, every dollar of that went to football, men's basketball, and baseball. An important caveat we should note is that this data is based on the disclosures that student athletes are filing to their schools. In states like California and 23 other states, it is required by state law for student athletes to file to their universities all of their NIL deals. But we do have some reporting from collectives, from university officials, that not necessarily everybody is following that law. There's no enforcement, there's no oversight. So we don't know what we don't know. We don't know how much money is not being disclosed. But based on the money that we know has been disclosed, 100% of UCLA's collective money went to male athletes.
Well, on the subject of collectives, and we can branch away to something else in a moment, but Emily, if I follow up this one with you, and I'm going to throw a lot at you here. If we implicate the spirit or actual legislation of Title IX, what are the responsibilities of collectives? Do we know, are there certain guidelines they need to be following to make this more equal? And also, what's really interesting to me, and this is a bit of a tangent of my own, is in terms of value, we're seeing the ratings in women's sports, especially women's basketball, be higher than it's ever been before, to where the national title game actually drew more eyeballs than what the men's national championship game is. So if it's a conversation about worth and value, the women have it there. Is it just that these collectives that are organized by a group of people that have money, their passion projects just don't lie with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way you explained it sounds exactly right. Albert might be able to add more onto this because he did a lot of the reporting, but as far as I know, these collectives are not subject to Title IX. They can really do whatever they want. And then you get into the question of I remember covering the very early days of NIL when there were all these, guardrails being talked about and everything. Nobody knew what it was going to be. And it kept being like market value, what is the market value of an Illinois basketball player making an Instagram post? And it's like, people can try to put a number on that based on the number of followers, but like who really actually knows? So when you have these quote unquote like token tasks from the collective and they're saying we're going to pay you $160,000 for an Instagram post, like who's to say that's not the market value or what the market value should be? So I think that's why it's really complicated. But then what you mentioned about women's sports is one of the things that we dove into a lot, because when you look at the top deals for male athletes, like a lot of them were like at these schools that told us which ones were collective payments. Like a lot of times they were coming from the collective. At UCLA, there were 6-figure payments going to these men's athletes, and there were payments of that size to women's athletes, but they were all coming from those corporate brand deals. It was like Jordan Childs at UCLA seemed to be one of the ones who was getting these big checks from the company she endorses. So it seems like in a lot of ways, the women are having to work to build these followings to kind of earn the social media followings that warrant these big endorsement deals. Whereas the men are more likely to not really have that presence, but are getting that same big amount of money, but from the collective instead. And at some schools, when you break it down by, how much the men are getting from collective versus non-collective sources, the women might be getting more from the non-collective sources, but then because of the collective, the men ultimately end up earning more. And that was the case at UCLA.
Well, when we return with more of the Sports Life, this conversation will continue. But first, a timeout.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Dad. Did you get a new haircut or something? A new shirt? You're looking good.
What happened?
A little fender bender.
How little?
A few days in the shop little. But thanks to Mom and our agent, we've already submitted a claim and can track the status right from the app. Auto owners pays what they owe without any hassle.
Sounds like simple human sense.
I'm fine, by the way.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna ask.
Ask your independent agent if auto owners make sense for you.
So I graduated last year and got a job. Sweet! But it got boring. I didn't really have a purpose. Then I started volunteering with Community Action. It's a statewide network with 29 agencies across Michigan. Community Action helps people with food, housing, utilities, childcare, senior services, you name it. I found my purpose, helping people, changing lives. Won't you join me? Call 1-855-MI-ACTION or go to MichiganCommunityAction.org. Sponsored by Michigan Community Action and Michigan Association of Broadcasters.
This is a potter's field. When people can't pay for their funerals, they are buried here. It is a lonely, desolate place, littered with unmarked headstones. No one visits. No one leaves flowers. But it doesn't have to be that way. For as low as $1 a day, you can ensure your family will have the money to pay your funeral expenses. We offer burial insurance plans that pay up to $30,000. Considering the average funeral costs more than $10,000, that's peace of mind for your family. There are no medical exams, your rates won't increase, and your policy cannot be canceled as long as you make your premium payments. Call now to get approved in minutes and ensure your final resting place is more than just a pauper's grave in a potter's field.
800-562-2407. 800-562-2407. 800-562-2407. That's 800-562-2407. Paid for by Final Expense Direct.
We'll be back with more in a moment. This is The Sports Life.
We all make choices. When it comes to alcohol, kids make choices whether to drink or not.
Bye, Dad.
Bye-bye.
Remember, I'm going to Alex's party tonight and sleeping over.
Hey, have a seat for a second. Remind me about that party again?
Alex is just...
And adults make choices whether to talk about it. That's true of parents and every other trusted adult in a kid's life. Kids want to know our expectations when it comes to alcohol and other drugs. They want guidance and honest answers to their questions. And it makes a difference when the message is consistent and part of everyday conversations. So talk with your kids and help lead them on a positive path. Because when you talk, they hear you. For more information about talking with your kids about underage use of alcohol and other drugs, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov.
And welcome back for more of the Sports Life. Will Tiemann here along with Dalton Shetler. And don't forget, Auto Owners Insurance, simple human sense. Ask your independent agent if auto owners make sense for you. Well, we're talking about NIL economics, name, image, and likeness. And we're continuing our conversation we had with two wonderful reporters from the Washington Post, Emily Giambalvo and Albert Samaha. And one of the things we talked about was NIL, name, image, likeness. You get money for that. Well, the truth is, that's out the window, I think. And now it's all about how much if you want me to play for you. And we ask them if that's what they found in their research.
I think it's like that for men's basketball players and football players. It's paid to play for those two sports. And for everyone else, it's try to build as big of a social media following as you can in order to get paid for your labor, right? And I think it sort of strikes at the question, the philosophical question at the heart of a lot of this NIL stuff, at the heart of the question of how we pay college athletes, which is that is our intent to pay college athletes for their value on the field, or is it to pay for the labor that they put in? And that is a question that I think the NCAA has sort of kept at arm's distance, in large part because of those Title IX considerations, right? If the NCAA and universities are the ones paying athletes, then they have to be subject to those equality rules. But as long as it's in these third-party booster collectives, corporate endorsement deals, they're not subject to those policies, so they could pay them however they want. So for the booster collectives that control a large part of this pot of money that's going into NIL deals, they certainly see it as pay to play, and they're certainly paying these male athletes commensurate to their potential on-field performance. But for a lot of women's athletes, that's not the case. And I think UCLA is a really interesting example there, because Jordan Childs was probably the biggest earner within our data set. She's an elite athlete. She's an Olympian. She puts UCLA gymnastics on the map in a way few athletes can. And yet, based on our data, she did not get a single dollar from the collective affiliated with the school. The entirety of her earnings came from those corporate endorsement deals. So for Jordan Childs, it is not pay to play. For Jordan Childs, it is pay to post on Instagram, post on TikTok, and put even more time off the mat in order to get those numbers. And that's something that we're not seeing a lot of men's athletes having to do because they're able to get $100,000 basically just to play.
Albert, I kind of want to leave an open door for you here on this one, either to follow up on the simple point you're talking about there with social media and followings and the work that female athletes are doing for endorsements on that side, if you had some large data to kind of represent that, and if there was anything besides collectives and social media that your data pointed you to that said, oh, look here.
Yeah, the numbers which Emily will be able to give more data on were kind of skewed very heavily towards men's basketball and football, right? So of the 12 schools where we got data that categorized gender and sports, to where we could see what's going to men, what's going to women, $92 million in NIL funding went to men's sports and $19 million to women's sports. A large portion of that disparity, of course, is because of football. It has the most players. It gets the most money. There's kind of a big slant. That's going to slant things. But that's why we looked really closely at basketball, because we felt there was a really interesting comparison there. Because as Emily mentioned, as you guys mentioned, the women's college game is in many ways exceeding the cultural relevance of the men's games, from TV ratings to the fact that a lot of people could probably name people like Juju Watkins, Paige Beckers, Malaysia Fulwiley, who might not be able to name a single men's college basketball player other than maybe like a Cooper Flagg, who's only going to be there for 1 year. So we saw basketball as an interesting kind of control sport where we could see how these disparities are actually playing out. Anyway, I think Emily probably has more details than I can into getting into what's really fascinating about the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, and that mostly covers it. I think one thing that Albert and I focused on in both the stories specifically about basketball and also the primary story that went through all the findings is the most stark thing to me when you're beyond just the total value for men versus women, men's basketball versus women's basketball, is how much more often the men are getting these like medium-sized deals. So like that 1,000 to 5,000, 1,000 to 20,000 range. We also found that is kind of the sweet spot for collectives. Like they love to issue payments of about that much. So even for these schools, we don't know which payments are collectives or what these payments were for. It maybe kind of hints at the same thing is happening there. So it just seemed like when you look at the distribution of the size of each deal, obviously we have no clue how much work goes into each one. It's hard to really control for, what the athlete was doing, but men's basketball, men's players in general, are just really more often getting checks for $1,000+
Well, if you look at all the money NIL draws under whatever umbrella you want to pick, the numbers we hear, a starting center could be $1 million or $2 million. A football team payroll could be over $20 million. Starting quarterback goes for $1 million or more. Did you guys find these numbers to be realistic, or are these numbers just something we sort of fabricated?
I'll just say, I don't, like Albert mentioned before, we only know what is disclosed. I think in some ways it backed up some of those numbers we've heard, like that 20 million number. Texas gave us data, and their football team over 3 years was at that 20 million, and LSU was at 8 million, and that's just disclosures. So I think to me, it gave a little bit of evidence to the fact that these football teams are drawing millions and millions, maybe not quite as high as you would have expected if this 20 million per year is truly the case. Of course, we didn't get Ohio State data, Oregon data. So it's hard to know. I don't know. Albert, do you have anything else on that?
Yeah, I think one of the realities we aim to really dig into or present in our project was to show how little everyone actually knows. Because it felt like to me, and one of the things I think that interested us in diving into this is that a lot of people have been speaking, throwing these numbers around with a degree of certainty that seems disingenuous. A lot of these estimations on like and we see them all over the place from a bunch of different outlets from the industry of like the Arch Manning or Shedeur Sanders' NIL worth, and then they'll put some number out there. But like Emily said, those numbers are based entirely on like social media followings, and we don't actually know what those rates are. And so I think what we wanted to introduce to the public was kind of how much mystery actually exists. We set out to get as much data as we could. We expected to only be able to get a small amount of that data, and we wanted to both use that sample size to be able to extrapolate some conclusions that we can confidently say probably apply universally, but also to really underscore the point that no matter how hard we try, there is only a certain amount of data we are capable of getting, and that is not a free market system, and that is a system that is naturally going to be inconsistent in who's able to know what their value is and who's not, who has the power to kind of dictate what the value is, whether student athletes have any sense of knowing what they can ask for if they don't know what their teammates are making. So I think one of the important things we wanted to really underline was the fact that a lot of these numbers might be rooted in some reality, but without more transparency, it's really speculation, and it's really not quite as clear, I think, as a lot of people that are throwing these numbers around think it is.
My final question, and this goes back to the inequity, because a lot of the research and the data you had fixated on the inequity that exists in this space, this economy. Emily, I wanted to ask you, obviously there's all sorts of problems that have led to such an inequity, but when we talk about some of the revenue sharing models that exist, if the TV contracts broke apart separate, where women's basketball was able to get its own TV contract instead of being lumped in with Olympic sports, how much does that possibly alleviate the problems?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways it would help. It would also just help us get a sense of like what the revenue these programs are actually bringing in. Like I follow gymnastics really closely. I think women's gymnastics could be up there in terms of surprising people. With at some schools, the revenue, softball has a great postseason. Like there are a lot of programs that I think maybe we don't know what the revenue is. And it seems like that is, I have a lot of colleagues who have done way more reporting on this than I have, but like that seems to be the thing that everyone goes back to on women's basketball, about how it was in the past so easily dismissed as not bringing in revenue, like its men's counterpart. And in a lot of ways, it's like, well, actually, we just don't know because the media rights deal was lumped in with all these other sports. So I think it would help. It would at least put a number on it. I still think it's just going to be super complicated for a revenue sharing model. Again, seems like the direction things are moving, but like, how do you put that number on a women's lacrosse player at Maryland? Or, like what do you do for all these other sports? What about the sports that maybe really aren't bringing in enough revenue to distribute? Like, is it coming from football, or does that revenue stay within a team? They're just some really interesting things. But in terms of women's basketball, yes, like obviously having a separate media rights deal would show how much money they are warranting.
So as a final thought, where do we go from here?
The short answer is I don't know. I think it seems inevitable that some sort of that the NCAA ultimately will have to just embrace some sort of professionalization. It seems that these athletes will probably inevitably have to be considered employees. It seems that the system of college sports as we know it is going to transform radically in ways that I can't even imagine at this point. And we're really just at the very start of what seems like will be a long, complicated, transformational process that could last who knows how long. I don't know. What do you think, Emily?
Yeah, I mean, I think the same. Like when you think of how different college sports were 5 years ago in this context of athlete payment and athlete rights and empowerment and stuff like that, it has changed a ton. And I think, it's wild to think that 5-7 years ago, an athlete signing an autograph. I mean, I was a student at Georgia when Todd Gurley was suspended for getting money for an autograph. And it's like, college sports has changed so much. And I think a lot of people would say for the better, because, these athletes have value and deserve to reap the benefit of that. But I can only imagine 5 years from now, we'll be saying the same thing where it's like, think of how much has changed in the past 5 years. So I do think it's going to keep changing dramatically. But in a lot of ways, athletes are continuing to have more rights and are getting to kind of enjoy the benefits of their value.
Emily and Albert, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Such a good time.
From the Washington Post, Emily Giambalvo and Albert Samaha. When we come back with more of the sports life, our parting shots in just a moment.
So, got one for you, boss.
Oh, yeah?
What's black, white, and dented all over?
I give up.
The company truck. I know, but thanks to our agent, we've already submitted an insurance claim and can track the status right from the app. Auto owners pays what they owe without any hassle.
Lucky for you, that's simple human sense.
Ask your independent agent if auto owners make sense for you.
So I graduated last year and got a job. Sweet! But it got boring. I didn't really have a purpose. Then I started volunteering with Community Action. It's a statewide network with 29 agencies across Michigan. Community Action helps people with food, housing, utilities, childcare, senior services, you name it. I found my purpose, helping people, changing lives. Won't you join me? Call 1-855-MI-ACTION or go to MichiganCommunityAction.org. Sponsored by Michigan Community Action and Michigan Association of Broadcasters.
If you have diabetes, listen up. If you have insurance, you can qualify for a continuous glucose monitor. With a CGM, you can continuously track your levels and trends and spend more time in range, significantly lowering your A1C. More importantly, a CGM eliminates the one thing most people with diabetes hate: painful finger sticks. Order your new continuous glucose monitor today. If you use insulin and if you've seen your diabetes care provider within the last 6 months, you may qualify for your own CGM right now. We'll do all the insurance paperwork and deliver your new CGM at little or no out-of-pocket cost to you. Medicare and most insurances will cover your CGM, so don't wait. Have your insurance handy and call the Aptiva Medical CGM Health Hotline right now.
800-948-6912. 800-948-6912. 800-948-6912. That's 800-948-6912.
We'll be back with more in a moment. This is The Sports Life.
Anybody ready for a burger?
I'm State Fire Marshal Rich Miller, reminding everyone to think safety first when it comes to outdoor grilling, whether it's charcoal or gas. Never overload your grill with food. Excess fat and grease will create large flames. Grill outdoors and never inside or in a garage. Never leave a grill unattended and always keep a fire extinguisher nearby. For more tips on safe grilling, visit the Bureau of Fire Services website at michigan.gov/BFS.
Medicaid and CHIP offer free or low-cost health coverage for children and teens. Hospital and doctor visits, prescriptions, shots, and more are covered. That's peace of mind for parents if a child is sick or gets injured. And parents may now be eligible for Medicaid too, even if they've applied in the past. Enrollment is always open. Visit insurekidsnow.gov or call 1-877-KIDS-NOW. Paid for by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
And welcome back for more of the Sports Life. Will Teeman here along with Dalton Shetler. Interesting show this week. NIL economics. Interesting conversation, and the facts make it more intriguing. And a nice chat with Bill Bender about the craziness called Big Ten football. And so now it is time to move on to the parting shot. So, Dalton, what do you got?
Well, first, I do want to give everybody a reminder. Make sure you give us a follow on Twitter or X, whatever you call it. We're called @SportsLifeNow. That's, again, @SportsLifeNow. You can find all the different pieces that Will just laid out for you and be able to catch the show in its entirety right there. But for my parting shot, I wanted to take a look in Madison, Wisconsin, because as Big Ten basketball is getting underway, you know, some teams have some mid-majors come in for non-conference games and whatnot, and a lot of times it'll open the door for some of the reserves to get into these games. And we've seen some pretty unique moments over the years. Given last year at Michigan State, you had Tom Izzo's son, Steven Izzo, get a bucket in one of these games late in action. Well, in Madison, Wisconsin, Greg Gard's son, Isaac, gets in the game late and drills a three-pointer. Let's have a listen to the moment.
Back to Ilver through his hands. 8 seconds on the shot clock. Gard for three. Good! Isaac Gard! His first points as a Badger.
How about the coach's kid calling his own number here? What a big bucket for Isaac Gard, and what a unique moment that is for father and son there in Wisconsin.
No question about it, Dalton. No question. Well, mine parting shot is not as much fun. But every now and then we lose sight of the fact that we do have college football players, meaning they do go to class and they do earn degrees and that sort of thing. And one of the great awards given out every year by the National Football Foundation and College Football Hall of Fame is the William V. Campbell Trophy. And what that's all about, it is football's premier scholarship award. It's a list of people who play great football and are also pretty good in the classroom as well. So 2 Big Ten players made the list, and I thought I would point them out. Dylan Gabriel, the quarterback at Oregon, GPA of 3.43. He also plays pretty well. He is second all-time in the NCAA in terms of passing yards and total touchdowns. Not too bad. And he's also top 10 in terms of career completions. And the other fellow to make the list was Seth McLaughlin, the center at Ohio State. His GPA, Dalton, is 4.0. I never saw that one in my time, and that was pretty good. And to say he's one of the best offensive linemen in all of college football would probably be a little bit of an understatement. So with that, that's a wrap for our show this week. And as always, we appreciate you tuning in. And we should also note that you can find us wherever you find your podcast, like SoundCloud, Spotify, and Apple. And make sure to check us out and hit subscribe. As always, thanks to the Big Ten Network. The Sports Life is produced by Dalton Shetler and assisted by Owen Cronin. Our executive producer is Wendy Hart. So on behalf of Dalton Shetler, I'm Will Teeman, and thanks for your time.